Hey there, my name's Brashler, and in this video, I want to give you an X32 routing basics and talk about how the audio actually flows through the Behringer X32. This is going to be perfect for those of you who are brand new users to the Behringer X32, or those of you who find the routing structure of the Behringer X32 to be a little bit confusing. Now, if you are a new user of the Behringer X32 and are looking to find out more about how to actually use this thing and mix, I have an X32 fundamentals course over at my website at drewbrashler.com where I teach my favorite fundamentals of the Behringer X32 to you through an entire video course. So if you're interested in checking that out, head over to drewbrashler.com, and also I have a link down in the description below. But otherwise, let's actually dive in and see about the routing structure of the Behringer X32. Now, the Behringer X32, by default, has its inputs on the back automatically routed to the corresponding channel. Now, so we have our input sources on the back of the board where our XLR ins are, we have our aux ins, all of those basically correspond to all of the different channels of the board. But you can actually change that inside of the routing structure of the board in a few different places. So first off, I have this microphone, and this is plugged into my input 1, which we call local 1 because it is local to the console. Now that automatically, if we go to our routing button and then look at our input blocks, we can see that our channels, which are corresponded to the top here, so we have channels 1 through 8, we have channels 9 through 16, we then have channels 17 through 24, and 25 through 32, and then we have our aux ins, which are here. Now, if I go and change something here in this block patch, what it's going to do is it's going to change these corresponding channels to be from that source. So for instance, if we had a DL32 or an S16 or something like that, an AES50 stage box connected to our A port of the AES50A, and I wanted those first 8 inputs on that stage box to align to my first 8 channels here, all I would do is go to routing, input, and then I would go scroll down to AES50A 1 through 8, meaning that is port A and the first 8 channels that's on that. And once we click that, then it's going to put a little A down here in all of these first 8 channels. But in this case, I need this to be local to be able to talk into this channel. So I'm going to change this back to local 1 through 8. And I'm going to go ahead and start talking into this. So I'm going to go back to my home view of this. I'm going to go press view on the configuration in Preamp, and I'm going to start talking to this microphone. Check 1, 2. Hey, so we can see that this is pretty low here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my gain, and I'm going to start turning this up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Check. 1, 2. And so the goal of me setting the preamp level of this microphone is to get it up to nominal gain, which is about this -18 mark. So when your performer or instrument is playing at its loudest, check 1, 2, we should be landing that channel around the -18 to -12 mark on our meter. And that's going to give us a sufficient amount of gain to do all the rest of the things that we need to do with this microphone. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So at this point, we can see that I have signal from my channel to my meters here. Now, notice we're not hearing this anywhere. And that's because I have my PA, or the YouTube feed for you guys, plugged into my 7 and 8 outputs on the back of my Behringer X32. So we have our input source on the back, remember local 1 through 8, and this is local 1 where this XLR is plugged into. We have it to a channel, and then that channel is being sent to my left-right bus. And we can see that by having this channel selected, and we can see that the stereo bus button is lit, and that means that it is being sent to my stereo bus. Now, the stereo bus is our main left-right. That is the thing that we take all of our channels to. It sums them together into stereo and puts them on this single master fader. Now, if I turned this fader down, we would notice that we wouldn't have any metering right here. And so we want to go ahead and turn this back up to 0. But what I need to do next is I need to route this output to an output on the back of my Behringer X32. And so to do that, we go back to our routing page and we tab all the way over to our patch out. Now, my patch out gives me 16 channels of patching available to me on my out 1 through 16. That's what it's titled here. And if we want to, we can actually tab one over to our XLR out. Now, those of you who are using the X32 rack, the producer or the compact, you are only going to have 8 outputs available to you on the back of the Behringer X32. If you have a full size, you will have 16 outputs. And so we can see that my block patches is here, just like we had on the input page. So when we go to the XLR out, this is actually what is being output to these set of channels here on the output side of my Behringer X32. So we have 16 channels here, and we can see 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, and 13 through 16. So that is all 16 of the outputs. Now again, if you have a smaller version of the X32, you're only going to have 8. And so what I want you to see is that 1 through 4, so outputs 1 through 4 back here, are coming from output 1 through 4, which sounds kind of silly. But if we change this to 9 through 12, then that means that the first 4 are actually 9 through 12, not 1 through 4. So when we are looking at this, if you're having some trouble getting things working, come look at your XLR patch and see if these are 1-to-1, which they should be. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go page over to our output patch. And I have my PA plugged into 7 and 8 on the back of my console. So what I want to do is scroll down to output 7, and I'm wanting to change this from being mix bus 7 and actually pull it from main left. So all I have to do is scroll up to main left and I can assign. Now, we have these tap points, which are important. So on the output side, when we are outputting our signals from the X32 to our outputs, this gives us a tap point of where we want to pull it from the source that we just selected. Now, that means with my main left right, if I have this set anything other than post fader, then that means that if I take this fader and I turn it down, if it's set on any of these other things, input low cut, pre-EQ, post-EQ, pre-fader, then this fader adjustment that I'm doing here on my master fader isn't going to change anything. So let's actually get these routed, and I'll show that to you here in a second. So I now have output 7 set to main left and check 1, 2. So we can now hear my microphone in the left side of our PA. And so let's go to output 8, and we will route this from main right. And so now we hear me in full stereo here. Now, if I change my tap point here and I change it to, say, pre-fader, and I go to my output 7 and change that to pre-fader, when I turn this down, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, it's still going through. And so this is why my suggestion is on your outputs, if you have anything that you need to have volume control over, you need to have this tap point set to post fader. Now this also goes for a monitor send. So say we go up to our output 1 here, which is our mix bus 1. And so this is maybe a floor wedge that's sitting up on the stage. And I want this to be pre-fader from the channel, meaning that if I'm adjusting my mix at front of house, I'm not wanting to be affecting the send to that monitor that's up on stage. But what I do need to have control over is the overall volume. So if we go to bus 1 through 8 here, and I see my bus 1, if I turn this up to 0, then that means it's going to be sending to my output 1 of my mix bus 1, and then it goes to my XLR 1 because it's routed here on output 1. We can tab over here. We can see XLR output 1 is being pulled from output 1 through 4. So that's correct. But if I set that tap point here to anything other than post fader, if I go and adjust this fader, it's not going to control the volume, which is bad. So I want to have this tap point set to post fader. We want to have this set at 0. And then now what I can do is I could go and select my mix bus 1, press sends on fader, and then now my left side of the board changes so that I can actually mix what's going to this floor wedge, this monitor. So now I can go and start mixing this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we can see that I have volume going to this, and if I had a monitor plugged into my output 1, then we would start hearing that volume on the other side. So we have taken our input sources that are on the back of the board, put them into our corresponding channels. We have sent them to the main left right. We have then outputted them to the PA. We have also set up a monitor mix with our mix bus 1 of that floor wedge. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is after you have your sends on fader pressed and after you're done with it, we'll notice that this is flashing. And that's because we're still in sends on fader mode, meaning that we are still mixing what is selected. And so I want to press sends on fader again, and that will flip me back into my front of house mode, allowing me to mix my front of house, which is fantastic. Now I want to talk about the rest of the routing structure here on our routing page. So I'm going to page back over to our input here, and I want to talk about all of the different options that we have here. Now, like I was saying earlier, if I had a DL16 or an S32 connected on my AES50, and I was wanting to get that into my input channels. Now, this is going to be perfect for those of you who are using an X32 rack, an X32 compact, or an X32 producer, because you only have 16 channels on the back of your board. So if you want to use your 17 through 32, you'll need to connect an additional stage box. And so I actually have a DL32 connected on the other side of this AES50 line, and I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my AES50A port. Now what we'll notice is right away, up here at the top it says DL32, and this is green. If this is set to red, then that means that you have an issue with that stage box. Maybe the cable is bad. Maybe the DL32 is set to not take its sync from the console. And that would be something that you would need to troubleshoot and diagnose and fix. But when we have a stage box, we're wanting our X32 to be the main source of sync. Now, I know that that's a little bit confusing here, but if we go to setup, we want to make sure that when we go to our clock source, that this is set to internal. And then any stage boxes that we have connected to our console, we would want those to be also coming from the sync from the main X32 here. Now that we have our DL32 connected to our A port, I'm wanting to correspond the first 16 inputs on that DL32 to my channels 17 through 32. Now this is going to be the same thing if you had two SD8s or an S16 or an SD16. We're just going to be taking those first 16 channels on our AES50A port, which is where this cable is coming from, and I'm going to route that to my 17 through 32. Now to do this, we're going to go and press our routing and go to our input block, and on 17 through 24, I'm going to then go down to AES50A 1 through 8. And I'm going to press connect. And then for my 25 through 32, I'm going to go to AES50A 9 through 16. Now what this has done is this has set the 16 local inputs on the back of my board to go through channels 1 through 16. And then for 17 through 32, that's coming from my AES50A port, coming from my stage box. Now, if I plugged into the AES50B port, then instead of selecting A on these, I would go down and select B, 1 through 8 and 9 through 16. But notice my DL32 is on my A port, so I'm going to go and select my A, 1 through 8 and A, 9 through 16. Now, when we go look at our channels here, we will notice that on my channel 17, this says A01, meaning that it is pulling from the source of AES50A1. And then if I look at channel 32, this says A16, meaning that it is pulling its source from my AES50A port of 16 that's on my DL32. Now, I have this gold microphone plugged into my channel 1 on my DL32. So if I go ahead and start talking into this, check 1, 2, we will notice that there's a little bit of signal here when I get kind of loud. So let's go ahead and select this, and I'm going to start adjusting this gain up. So let's press view here and check 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check 1, 2. And let's go ahead and turn this up. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we can hear that this microphone is working. So not only do I have my channel 1 on this microphone, but then I also have this gold microphone here on my channel 17. And both of these are being summed to my stereo bus, which is being sent out my output 7 and 8 going off to my PA. Now, what if I wanted to have an output on my DL32 coming from my board here? Maybe I want to route my main left right to, say, output 15 and 16 on that stage box. Well, all I have to do is go to routing and then go to my output and then go scroll down to, say, 15 and 16. Now, we can see output 15 is already on main left and post fader, which is correct. And then output 16 is coming from main right and post fader. Now this means that I have my outputs 15 and 16 already pre-configured for this. So my PA is coming out currently of 7 and 8 and 15 and 16. But for those of you who have the X32 Producer, Rack, Compact, you don't have these additional 9 through 16 outputs on the back of your board. So when you have this set up, my suggestion is to have these 9 through 16 in your head as being those outputs for your stage box. The next thing that we need to do is, now that I know that my 9 through 16 is going to be for my stage box, and I know that 15 and 16 are going to be dedicated for that stage box to output my PA, what I need to do is I need to page over to my AES50A tab. Now, my A tab is specific because I have this stage box plugged into my AES50A port on the back of my X32. Now, this page is the outputs from my board to that stage box. This has nothing to do with the inputs coming from that stage box. So this page of AES50A and AES50B is only dedicated for outputs, and actually card is the same way. But when we are talking about AES50A, I am talking about the outputs that are being sent over this AES50 cable back to the stage box. Now, that stage box can be configured in a number of different ways. Now, if you have an S32 or a DL32, the 16 outputs that are available on that device are going to pull from my first 16 channels of the AES50A outputs that are coming from my board. So we can see that I have 1 through 8 is pulling from outputs 1 through 8, and 9 through 16 is also pulling from outputs 9 through 16. And that means that the outputs that we have on my Behringer X32 here are identical to the outputs on my stage box. Now, if you have a S16, DL16, SD8, and SD16, DL8, DL16, any of those have some configuration options on those boxes. And I just so happen to have an SD8 here, and right here on my box, I have the ability of choosing different outputs available on my outputs here. So if I have this on out 1 through 8, that means that the outputs on the SD8 here, 1 through 8, is pulling from this column here. If I have this set to 9 through 16, then it's pulling from 9 through 16 here. If I have this set to 17 through 24, then that means it's pulling from this column here. Now this is important because for those of you who have an X32 rack, Producer, Compact, that you only have the 8 outputs on your board. If you want to have an additional 8 outputs with your SD8 or stage box, then you need to configure that correctly. And so in this case, if I had this connected on my AES50A line, then I would want to make sure that my 1 through 8 is either set to 9 through 16, or that this is set to 9 through 16. If this is set to 1 through 8, then it's going to pull from this column. And that means that I would want to have this routed from 9 through 16. That way I have an additional 8 outputs available to me for my routing. But if I have this set to 9 through 16 on this switch, then it's going to be pulling from this column, which is already configured to 9 through 16. So I don't actually have to change anything here. Just keep that in mind. Depending on how you have your boxes configured is where you will want to pull your outputs from. Now, there's one other thing that I need to mention to you, and that's this Ultranet port right here. Now, this Ultranet port pulls from our AES50 33 through 48. Now, this is for the P16 system, or the personal monitoring system of the X32. And we want to make sure that those are being pulled from P16 1 through 16 on 33 through 48. If you do happen to change this from something to be different, then it's going to change how your P16 is working if you're using that Ultranet output. So remember, our input page is going to be our channel processing block patch, meaning that our channels of the X32 is pulling from whatever we choose here. If we go to our AES50A, this is our outputs through the AES50A port back to the stage box that's connected there. And same thing with AES50B. Now, the next thing that we have is our card page. Now, if we have a XUSB, if we have an XUF card, if we have the XLive card, XDante card, XWaves card, any of those devices, we have our expansion slot on the back of the board. And we have the ability of choosing what channel sources we want to go to that card. And so, for instance, I have my XLive card here, and I'm wanting to do a multi-track recording. And so I know that I have already changed my input patch to be local 1 through 16 and AES50A 1 through 16. So what I need to do is I need to copy this over to my card page. And that way my card is receiving the same channels that my channels are, the same sources that my channels are. And so 1 through 8 would be local 1 through 8. 9 through 16 would be local 9 through 16. 17 through 24, we would change to AES50A 1 through 8. And then 25 through 32 would then be AES50A 9 through 16. At this point, my card is receiving the same channel sources that my channels are of the board, which is correct. So now at this point, my board is already set up for 1, receiving the audio from the sources that I need, already set up for outputting my left-right to the PA, already set up for my monitor that I have up on stage, and my multi-track recording with my card on the back of the console. Now, there's one other place that I can change my routing that can do a little bit of mess up for some volunteers if you have them. And that's actually from the channel itself. So we can see that if I select my channel 1 here and I press View in the Configuration and Preamp section, my source is source 1, which we can see is input 1. But I can actually change this on a channel by channel basis, depending on what is being put here in this channel block patch. So, for instance, I'm going to plug my gold microphone into my channel 2 here. So I'm going to go to 17 and I'm going to turn this down so we don't hear it. And on my channel 2, I have channel 2 selected. I'm going to press View in the Configuration and Preamp section, and I'm going to change my source, and I'm going to scroll this down, and I'm going to change it to channel 17, or A01. So at this point, this channel now has A01 down here, meaning that it is pulling its source from my block channel 17, and that is coming from AES50A1. And so if I take this microphone and I turn it up, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, we will start hearing that, and we can hear that this is now working. Now, the challenge of doing this is if you have a volunteer that doesn't know that there is routing on a channel by channel basis, that can sometimes be a problem. And so we can see that I have this channel 2, check 1, 2, this is still going here. But if I went to my channel 17 it's still routed here. And so maybe I have this, and now I have a doubling up because I have channel 17 turned up and I have channel 2 turned up. Now, the problem lies in when your volunteer or that engineer comes and mutes these channels, this is still going through, but these are muted. And that's because it's still coming through on a channel that's buried in the X32. So just keep that in mind, that if you are doing channel by channel patching off of that channel block that we have here, then you can, one, lay out your board how you want to, which is super helpful. But the downside is you can get a little bit more complicated with your routing, and you can have some getchas with this channel 17 being turned up, still pulling from AES50A1, and your channel 2 in this instance coming from AES50A1. These are both here, so we have a double patch. And so even with these channels muted, I can still make this work by having this channel turned up. The very last thing that I want to talk about is my aux in here that we have. Now this corresponds to my auxiliary channels that are on my aux in USB layer of my board. Now the USB left-right channels are dedicated for my USB recorder slot. And that means that if I had a USB stick in here and I had some media available, which is a WAV file, to play off of this, it would play right here on these two channels. Now one thing I do want to mention is we can go and select our channel, go to our configuration in Preamp, and we can actually change where this source is coming from. But we won't be able to actually change this USB left-right here. I can't select a different source to be on this list. The USB left-right is always going to be there. So just keep that in mind. You can put something else here if you want to, but as far as the source goes, we only have 6 sources that we can change. And if we go to our routing, we can see that here. So I can select on my aux in, I can select a bunch of different options for what's being fed into these 6 channels here. So if I select local 1 through 2, that means that my input 1 and 2 locally on the XLR is going to show up on my aux 1 and 2 channels. Now, aux 3 through 6 is still pulling from the TRS inputs on the back of the board. Now, keep in mind that these are line level inputs, so I would not suggest plugging in an acoustic guitar into one of these because it does need to be a line level signal, so nice and loud. But if I go and select local 1 through 4, that means that my XLRs 1 through 4 are now showing up here on these channels, and then 5 and 6 are pulling from my aux 5 and 6 on the back of the board. Now I can also select AES50A 1 through 6, and now I have changed all of these to being from my AES stage box. Or if I select AES50B, now my aux channels are pulling from my B port of channels 1 through 6 coming from my AES50 stage box. And very lastly, I have my card 1 through 6. I could choose that. And then we also have this thing called user in, which I'm going to have a dedicated video coming out next week about that specifically. So if you're wanting to learn more about user input and output patching, stay tuned for next week when I release that video. The last 2 things that I want to talk about today is that if we page all the way over to our P16, this is our P16 patch available to us for sending out to that Ultranet port that I was talking about earlier, with that 33 through 48 being for that Ultranet system, or the P16 system. Now this gives us 16 available channels to pull signals from. We still have the same channels or sources internally on the board, but we have an additional 16 output routing for us for dedicating outputs for those P16s. So, for instance, my channel 1, I would want to pull from my direct out of channel 1, and then on the tap point for my P16 system, I'm not wanting my volume when I'm adjusting these faders from front of house to be affecting the volume being sent to the P16 system. And so at this point, this is where I would go and select, say, pre-fader, post-EQ, pre-EQ, or input low cut. Now, we notice this little +M. Now, if you select one with +M, then that means that if I mute that channel, it's not going to output to the P16 system. So just keep that in mind. If you go and select pre-fader, that is going to be before mute. But if you select pre-fader +M, that's going to be after the mute on the channels. The very last thing that we have is our aux page. Now, all of the X32 models have aux outputs. We have TRS outputs, and additionally on the 5 and 6, we have some RCA. Now, the RCA goes for the input side and the output side. And then we also, on the Behringer X32 full size, have an AES EBU output. Now, my aux outputs here can be from any of my sources that I have for my console. And so my aux out 1, I could maybe go and select to be, say, mix bus 1. And now I can connect a floor wedge to the output on the back of my board for my TRS outputs or my aux outs, and then just connect that into a floor wedge and have that working. Or if you had a video system that you needed to feed audio from your board to, maybe let's go use aux 5 and 6, and I can pull from my main left and my main right. And now I have my main left and right outputting on aux 5 and 6 on the back of my board. Now for AES EBU, which is going to be a digital protocol which send a stereo channel down an XLR data line, we can go and select AES EBU left, and we can route our channel, which is by default already on main left, and then on AES EBU right, it's defaulted to main right. So keep that in mind. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you today. If you do happen to have any questions, or there's a video that you're hoping that I would make on the X32 or really any of the production equipment that's out there, please post that in the comment section down below, as I'm always reading through those comments to find videos that can be helpful for you. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out my website at drewbrashler.com, where I have a bunch of digital downloads and courses available for the X32. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day.